Tokyo slept beneath a veil of darkness, its wooden houses packed tightly together, its narrow canals glimmering faintly in the moonlight. To the people below, the night seemed calm, yet far above something enormous stirred in the skies. American crews had christened their creation the Superfortress, a plane so large, so heavy, and so advanced that Japanese pilots once laughed. They called it a lumbering beast, too big to fly, a floating target that could never threaten the sacred heart of the empire. But on this night, the laughter would burn away in the glow of a firestorm. Engines roared as hundreds of silver giants formed up in the black sky, each one carrying a deadly cargo designed not just to destroy factories, but to ignite the very city itself. In the quiet moments before release, crewmen peered down through the haze and saw Tokyo sprawling endlessly, unaware of what was about to unfold. Then came the signal. Bomb bay doors opened and the first wave of canisters tumbled into the darkness. Within seconds, the streets below erupted in rivers of flame. A firestorm roared to life, sucking oxygen from the air, lifting roofs clean off buildings and turning entire neighborhoods into a single furnace. The wooden capital of Japan, once thought untouchable, was engulfed in an inferno that would kill more people in a single night than the atomic bombings yet to come. What the Japanese had once dismissed as too massive, too unwieldy, had now proven to be the perfect engine of destruction. The B-29 was no laughing matter. It was the storm itself, an American creation so powerful it could erase a city overnight. The story of the B-29 superfortress did not begin in the flames over Tokyo, but years earlier, when American planners imagined a war that might stretch across the entire Pacific Ocean. By the late 1932, U.S. military leaders knew that geography would be their greatest enemy. Japan lay thousands of miles from the American west coast, its cities protected by sheer distance as much as by fighters and flak. To even touch the Japanese homeland, America needed something radically new, an aircraft that could carry tons of bombs farther, higher and faster than any machine ever built before. That answer came in the form of the Boeing B-29. At first glance, it looked like a monster, one of the largest bombers the world had ever seen. But what set it apart was not just size. It was the technology woven into every rivet and panel. For the first time in history, a bomber carried a pressurized cockpit and crew compartments, allowing men to fly above 3,000,000 feet without freezing to death. The B-29 had a maximum range of more than 3,200 miles, enough to leap from remote island bases straight to the heart of Japan. And it bristled with innovation, remote-controlled gun turrets guided by a central fire control computer, each one operated by gunners peering through periscopic sights. It was quite literally a flying fortress on a new scale. Producing such a machine was an act of faith in America's industrial might. At its peak, U.S. factories turned out nearly 4,000 B-29 seconds, each one costing more than a battleship of the previous generation. Entire new assembly lines were built with plants in Wichita, Omaha, Marietta, and Renton working around the clock. Tens of thousands of workers, many of them women and minorities, became part of the vast web that fed the B-29 program. Japanese intelligence agents whispered reports back to Tokyo, but even they underestimated the numbers. No one inside Japan truly grasped what it meant when America harnessed its economy to war. The first B-29 raids began not from the Pacific, but from the high plateaus of China. In June 1944, under Operation Matterhorn, the bombers struck targets as far away as Manchuria and even the Japanese home islands. Yet these missions were unsustainable. Every gallon of fuel, every pound of bomb had to be flown over the hump across the deadly Himalayas at a staggering cost. For every ton of bombs dropped on Japan, 6 tons of fuel and supplies had to be hauled over mountains. Crews joked bitterly that their real target was the mountain passes, not Tokyo. Everything changed with the Battle of the Marianas. In the summer of 1944, U.S. Marines and soldiers seized Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands instantly became the forward springboard for the superfortress. From Tinian alone, engineers carved 6 runways across coral flats, turning the island into the largest airbase in the world. Now Tokyo lay just 1,500 miles away, directly in reach of the B-29. For the first time, the American bomber offensive could be launched in sustained waves day after day. But the early results were disappointing. The B-29 seconds were designed to fly at extreme altitude where Japanese flak and fighters could barely reach them. Crews soared above 3,000 feet, aiming for precision strikes on aircraft factories, oil refineries, and arsenals, yet nature itself betrayed them. Unbeknownst to meteorologists at the time, a fierce river of air surged above Japan, the jet stream. Winds of 175 to 200 miles per hour ripped across the stratosphere, tossing bombs miles off target. Crews who thought they were striking Mitsubishi plants in Nagoya often saw their payloads scatter across fields or into the sea. Accuracy was abysmal. Japanese cities were vast, but their war industries were hidden within them, buried in small workshops and dispersed facilities. Striking a single engine factory from 6 miles up proved almost impossible. Meanwhile, the cost was high. Long flights of 7 to 10 hours drained both men and machines. Engines overheated, crews suffered frostbite, and Japan's night fighters picked off stragglers. By late 1944, results looked grim. America had built the world's most advanced bomber only to find it neutered by a current of wind. Japanese newspapers mocked the B-29 as a failure proof. They said that the Americans could not touch the heart of the empire. Too big to fly, some pilots sneered, insisting the superfortress was nothing but an oversized bluff. Enter General Curtis LeMay. Known for his bluntness and iron, Will LeMay had already proven himself in Europe, commanding B-17 seconds. Now in January 1945, he took command of the 101 Bomber Command in the Marianas. He studied the failure of high-altitude precision raids and realized the problem was not the plane, it was the strategy. Against a nation of wooden cities and cottage industries, precision was wasted. What mattered was destruction, not pinpoint hits. LeMay ordered a radical shift. Instead of flying high, the B-29 seconds would descend to just 5,000,9,000 feet. Instead of daylight raids with heavy defensive guns, they would strike at night, stripped of most armament, to carry more bombs. And instead of high-explosive ordnance, they would unleash fire. American chemists had perfected the M69 incendiary bomb, a small cluster device filled with napalm that ignited with terrifying ferocity. At Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, engineers had even built Japanese villages' mock houses of wood and paper to test how quickly they burned. The results were horrifyingly efficient. With these preparations complete, the stage was set. The great bomber, once mocked as too big to matter, would soon descend low, its belly stuffed with firebombs, its engines echoing over Tokyo, and when it came, it would not come alone. Hundreds of B-29 seconds would form a river of steel across the night sky, each one prepared to drown the Japanese capital in flames. The Japanese still believed the superfortress could never bend the course of war. Within weeks, that belief would be incinerated along with their cities. Tiếp tục, bạn đã nói TEFPTC yêu cầu viết đủ từ quy định 801.000 từ ChatGPT. Đã nói phần 3A diễn biến chính. The night of the 9th of March 1945 began with the steady rumble of engines on the coral runways of the Marianas. On Guam, Saipan, and especially Tinian, the airfields were alive with motion. Floodlights illuminated massive rows of B-29 superfortresses, their bomb bays groaning under the weight of hundreds of incendiary clusters. Ground crews worked in a blur, wiping sweat from their brows in the tropical heat. Each aircraft carried nearly 7 tons of firebombs, and when multiplied across the armada, the scale was staggering. Over 300 B-29 seconds would take part in the mission, one of the largest aerial operations of the war to that date. LeMay had drilled his crews in a new style of attack. Gone was the idea of carefully measured high-altitude formation bombing. Instead, the superfortresses would fly individually spaced minutes apart, forming a continuous stream. They would enter Tokyo one by one, drenching the target area with overlapping waves of fire. Altitude would be cut to between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, dangerously low compared to the old doctrine but beneath the jet stream, and ideal for laying incendiaries. Gunners, once bristling at every turret, were stripped down to reduce weight. Armor plate was removed. For the first time, the great bomber looked almost naked, but this was the price of carrying more destruction. The chosen weapon was the M69 incendiary. Small and deceptively simple, it was a thin canister packed with napalm gel and a timed fuse. Dropped in clusters from a larger shell, each bomblet ignited after piercing a roof, splattering flaming fuel across tatami mats, wooden beams, and rice paper walls. At Dugway, American scientists had proven the formula against mock Japanese homes built with authentic materials. The fire spread so quickly that entire test houses vanished in minutes. LeMay believed the same would happen to real neighborhoods in Tokyo, where 87% of buildings were wood and bamboo. As dusk faded one by one, the giants lifted from the runways. Pilots coaxed their engines into the night sky, forming long trails toward Japan. The crews settled into tense silence, knowing the hours ahead would test not only their courage but the very concept of strategic bombing. The flight across the Pacific was long and monotonous, but the men were haunted by the orders they carried. They weren't striking a factory or a dockyard. This time they were striking the capital itself. Tokyo waited below, still bustling with war. Though food was scarce and the economy strangled by blockade, the city pulsed with activity. Thousands of small workshops churned out parts for Zero fighters, rifles, and munitions, often hidden inside ordinary houses. Families lived side by side with factories. The Japanese military counted on this dispersal to protect their industry, but it also made the entire city a target. Civil defense was minimal. Fire brigades were lightly equipped, sirens were unreliable, and the population was unprepared for what was about to descend. Shortly after midnight, the first Pathfinder aircraft arrived over the city. They dropped clusters of magnesium flares, bright white torches that lit up the districts of Honjo and Fukagawa. For Japanese civilians who awoke to the glare, it was an eerie, almost beautiful sight. For the incoming bombers, it was the signal mark, the heart of the wooden capital for destruction. Moments later, the lead superfortress opened its bays and loosed the first incendiary clusters. Dozens of M-69 seconds rained down, piercing rooftops, shattering into alleys, and igniting with a vicious whoosh. Within minutes, small points of fire dotted the map of Tokyo like stars. The second and third waves arrived close behind. Each plane carried hundreds of incendiaries, and soon the points of fire merged into ribbons of flame. A strange phenomenon began to unfold. The heat created by thousands of burning structures generated its own weather. Winds whipped flames into walls, and the rising columns of hot air twisted into vortices that sucked oxygen from the ground. Firefighters rushed to the blazes but found their hoses useless. Water evaporated before it reached the flames. Some men collapsed from heat exhaustion before even approaching the inferno. American crewmen peering from above saw the glow spread like spilled paint across a canvas. Tokyo was a solid sheet of fire, one recalled stunned even as he manned his station. The plan was working with horrifying precision. By design, the stream of B-29 seconds dropped their cargo across a rectangular swath of the city, roughly 3 by 4 miles, ensuring overlap until the entire zone was engulfed. Japanese anti-aircraft gunners fought back desperately. Spotlights lanced through the haze, seeking silhouettes of bombers. Heavy flak boomed and tracer rounds arced upward. But the altitude was too low for accurate high-angle fire, and the confusion of smoke blinded the defenders. Fighters scrambled as well, but night combat was never a Japanese strength. Only a few interceptors found the stream, and even fewer broke through. The Americans, stripped of most defensive weapons, had gambled correctly. The defenders could not stop them. Still, danger remained. The firestorm itself turned against the attackers. Pilots found their aircraft bucking in violent updrafts, tossed like toys by the rising heat. Instruments faltered, wings shuddered, and in some cases B-29 seconds were lifted hundreds of feet unexpectedly. A few machines collided with turbulence, so fierce it ripped panels from the fuselage. Yet the stream pressed on each crew, clinging to training and determination. Below, panic consumed the city. Civilians poured into canals and rivers, hoping water would shield them from the heat. Mothers clutched children, stumbling through choking smoke. Those who fled into open spaces often found themselves trapped as fire closed in on all sides. The roar of wind was constant, like a typhoon made of flame. Survivors later described the sound as the earth itself breathing fire. Entire families vanished without a trace, their homes reduced to ash in minutes. By the time the last bombers turned for home, The mission had achieved exactly what LeMay intended. Tokyo's eastern wards were ablaze from edge to edge, a single furnace stretching for miles. Crews looked back and saw only one thing, a city drowning in its own fire. And this was only the beginning. Tiếp tục. Bạn đã nói TIFTC yêu cầu viết đủ từ quy định 801.000 từ ChatGPT đã nói phần 3B diễn biến chính. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the entire eastern half of Tokyo was a living inferno. From the vantage point of the B-29 cruise, circling back toward the Marianas, the city looked less like a metropolis and more like a volcano erupting from the plain. Flames leapt thousands of feet into the sky, painting the underbellies of the bombers a hellish orange. Even seasoned veterans of Europe, men who had seen Hamburg and Dresden, were stunned. One crewman confessed later, "Nothing we had seen before prepared us for Tokyo. It was as if the whole world was on fire. On the ground, the horror defied imagination. Firestorms are unlike ordinary blazes. They create their own weather systems. As the napalm-filled M69 bombs ignited by the hundreds of thousands, the heat grew so intense that oxygen was sucked from the streets, replaced by hurricane-force winds. Gusts of 30 to 40 miles per hour fanned the flames into roaring tornadoes. Roofs were torn from houses and pulled into the sky like paper. Those who tried to flee by running into canals found the water already boiling. Survivors spoke of mothers forced to dunk their children under the surface just to keep them alive for another moment. Tokyo's civil defense had been woefully unprepared for this kind of onslaught. Fire brigades arrived with buckets, hand pumps, and antiquated hoses, but the sheer scale overwhelmed them. Entire blocks ignited simultaneously, collapsing onto firefighters before they could even act. One officer reported that water from the city's reservoirs evaporated before it touched the flames. The oxygen deprivation was so severe that thousands suffocated without ever touching the fire. Above, the American bombers pressed forward in endless succession. Nearly 280 B-29 seconds reached the target that night, each releasing its load over carefully plotted grids. The crews flew at altitudes low enough to smell the smoke pouring from the inferno below. Many had stripped their aircraft of most guns, yet the Japanese defenders could do little. Anti-aircraft shells burst erratically in the haze, often hitting nothing but smoke. Night fighters scrambled, but the blinding glow of the city and the low altitude made interception nearly impossible. Out of the massive attacking force, only about 14 B-29 seconds were lost, an astonishingly small figure given the destruction they unleashed. For the civilians of Tokyo, there was no escape. The city was a labyrinth of narrow wooden alleys, and once the firestorm gained momentum, it cut off every route. Families tried to seek shelter in underground cellars, but many were roasted alive as flames consumed the oxygen. Others huddled on bridges only to find the structures collapsing beneath them. Those who plunged into the Sumida River hoped to survive, but the surface soon filled with so many bodies that swimmers could hardly move. Survivors recalled the terrible sight of the river glowing red from the reflection of flames choked with corpses drifting downstream. One of the most chilling aspects of the raid was its speed. In just a few hours, more than 15.8 square miles of Tokyo vanished. Nearly 267,000 buildings collapsed or burned. The flames rendered 1 million people homeless in a single night. Casualties remain debated, but most estimates range between 9,000,000 and 1,000,000 dead, making it the single most lethal bombing raid in history, surpassing even Hiroshima or Nagasaki in immediate deaths. To those who endured it, the memory was seared into every breath the night when their city became a furnace. American crews returning to base tried to process what they had seen. Some felt grim satisfaction, believing they had dealt a blow that might hasten the end of the war. Others were shaken, unable to reconcile the scale of destruction with the abstract concept of military necessity. One gunner whispered to his pilot, "God, what have we done?" But LeMay had little room for hesitation. In his mind, every day the war continued meant more American lives lost. If fire could shorten the conflict, then fire would be used without restraint. By dawn, Tokyo was unrecognizable. Thick columns of smoke still billowed into the sky, visible to reconnaissance planes hundreds of miles away. Entire neighborhoods were gone, leaving only blackened ash and twisted remnants of steel. Survivors stumbled through the ruins in shock, many with burns so severe they could not speak. The Japanese government censored much of the news, but the truth was undeniable: the capital had been gutted in a single raid. Factories hidden among houses, workshops supplying the Imperial Army, and entire districts essential to Japan's war economy were obliterated. The raid was not just a military victory, it was a psychological earthquake. For months, the Japanese press had mocked the B-29, dismissing it as clumsy and ineffective. Now those words tasted like ash. The very aircraft once ridiculed as too big to fly had proven to be an unstoppable terror capable of erasing a city overnight. No propaganda could disguise the reality visible to every citizen who walked through Tokyo's charred remains, and yet this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, LeMay unleashed similar raids against Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and dozens of other cities. Japan, a nation of wood and paper, was turned into kindling. By the end of May 1945, nearly half of Tokyo lay in ruins. By the summer, more than 60 cities would share its fate. The message was unmistakable: American industry had created a weapon too vast for Japan to resist. The superfortress had arrived, and with it came a new kind of war, one where cities could vanish in a single night, and where laughter at an enemy's machines could turn suddenly into stunned silence. Tiếp tục, bạn đã nói, TEFPTC yêu cầu viết đủ từ quy định 801.000 từ ChatGPT đã nói, phần 4 cao trào. The firebombing of Tokyo on the 9th of March 101945 was not an isolated act of devastation. It was the beginning of a relentless new campaign, one that would push the Japanese home islands to the brink of collapse. General Curtis LeMay, cold and calculating, had drawn a conclusion that stunned even his own staff. If one city could be gutted in a single night, then dozens more could follow. With American industry pouring out hundreds of B-29 seconds and millions of incendiary bombs, there was nothing to stop him. In the days after Operation Meeting House, reconnaissance photographs revealed the full scope of Tokyo's ruin. From the air, the eastern wards were nothing but scorched earth. Blackened ruins stretched for miles, punctuated by the twisted skeletons of steel bridges and warehouses. Analysts estimated that nearly 25% of the capital's manufacturing output had vanished overnight. The Japanese Army High Command was shaken. They had promised civilians that the home islands were safe, shielded by distance and the emperor's divine protection. Now, the very heart of the empire was reduced to ash. LeMay seized on this shock. On the 11th of March, just one day later, B-29 seconds struck Nagoya. Osaka followed. Then, Kobe. Each raid refined the new doctrine: low-altitude night missions, maximum incendiary loads, and the ruthless exploitation of Japan's vulnerability, its cities of wood and paper. Within a single week, 4 of Japan's most important urban centers had been burned. By the end of March, the pattern was unmistakable: every few nights another city would vanish in fire. The results were catastrophic. Nagoya lost 40% of its built-up area in successive raids. Osaka saw entire districts annihilated with casualties in the tens of thousands. Kobe, a vital port city, was turned into a charred wasteland in a matter of hours. By May, more than half of Tokyo itself was gone, over 50 square miles reduced to rubble. It was as though the American bombers were drawing a grim map across the Japanese archipelago, each red patch marking a city erased from the war effort. For the civilians, there was no respite. Sirens blared night after night, forcing families into crude shelters or riverside embankments. But nowhere was safe. The flames leapt too quickly, the bombs fell too thickly. Survivors described the nightmare as endless walls of fire advancing from every direction, screams echoing in the darkness, and the constant drone of engines above. In Osaka, one mother recalled clutching her infant as the heat seared her skin. "I thought the sun had fallen to earth." And yet, despite the devastation, the raids were surgical in their brutality. Unlike the high-altitude precision strikes that wasted bombs against open fields, LeMay's incendiary streams achieved horrifying efficiency. Military analysts later calculated that the Tokyo firebombing destroyed more square miles of urban area and killed more people in a single night than any other aerial attack in history, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The B-29 seconds had turned strategic bombing into something closer to industrial extermination. For the Japanese military, the implications were devastating. their air defenses had proven almost useless. Anti-aircraft guns could not adjust quickly enough to low-altitude night attacks, and radar coverage was poor. Pilots who scrambled in the darkness often returned without firing a shot. By April, Japan had virtually conceded the skies. The home islands, once thought invulnerable, were naked before the superfortress. The American crews felt the weight of what they were doing. Letters and diaries reveal conflicting emotions: pride in their aircraft, relief at surviving missions, but also horror at the sight of entire cities burning. Some called the raids necessary hell. Others admitted privately that the destruction sickened them. Yet LeMay was unsparing. If we lose the war, we'll be tried as war criminals. But if we win, history will remember that we ended it quickly. By June 1945, Japan's cities were a landscape of ashes. Over 1,000,000 civilians had been killed in Tokyo, tens of thousands more in Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and dozens of smaller cities. Millions were homeless. Production of aircraft engines, ammunition, and weapons collapsed. Workers who survived had no factories left to return to. The once proud empire staggered its war machine, gutted not by a single battle, but by a sustained hurricane of fire. And the raids did not stop. The B-29 seconds kept coming in daylight as well as night, with incendiaries and high explosives hammering every strategic target that remained. By July, LeMay's crews were even dropping propaganda leaflets over cities not yet attacked, warning civilians to flee before the next storm of fire. For many, there was nowhere to go. Japan was burning from end to end. The climax of the campaign was not only measured in the miles of destruction, but in the collapse of Japan's spirit. People whispered that the gods had abandoned them. Pilots who once laughed at the too-big superfortress now cursed it as the death machine that prowled their skies at will. Every rumble of distant engines filled civilians with dread. And still the Americans pressed on, determined to end the war without an invasion that might cost 1 million lives. The B-29, once mocked, had become the symbol of inevitability. With its vast range, enormous payload, and the brutal tactics devised by LeMay, it had accomplished what no fleet or army could achieve: the systematic destruction of a nation's urban heart. From the ashes of Tokyo to the rubble of Osaka, the message was clear. The laughter had stopped. Fear and despair had taken its place. Tiếp tục, bạn đã nói TIFPTC yêu cầu viết đủ từ quy định 801.000 từ ChatGPT, đã nói phần 5 hậu quả. Ý nghĩa: At dawn on the 10th of March 1945, Tokyo was no longer the same city. Smoke still curled into the sky, visible for more than 150 miles out to sea. The once crowded neighborhoods of Honjo, Fukagawa, and Asakusa were nothing but blackened ruins. Families wandered through ash and rubble, searching for loved ones who would never return. The night's devastation was staggering: an estimated 1,000,000 dead, another million homeless, and 16 square miles of the capital obliterated. It was the single most destructive air raid in history, deadlier in immediate toll than either of the atomic bombings yet to come. The effect on Japan's war economy was devastating. Factories that had been hidden inside residential blocks were gone, along with the workers who ran them. The raid eliminated an estimated quarter of Tokyo's industrial capacity in one night. Even more damaging was the collapse of morale. Japanese leaders had promised their people that the mainland was invulnerable, protected by distance and divine favor. Now civilians saw with their own eyes that the American superfortresses could turn their capital into cinders in a few hours. The shock reverberated through every corner of society, and the firebombing did not stop with Tokyo. In the weeks and months that followed, LeMay's B-29 seconds unleashed similar destruction across the archipelago. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, city after city was reduced to rubble. By the summer of 1945, more than 60 Japanese cities had been heavily bombed. In total, some 300,000 civilians were killed, and nearly 9 million were left homeless. The American campaign was systematic, a rolling wave of fire designed to cripple Japan's ability to fight and to break its will to resist. From a military perspective, the strategy worked. Japan's output of aircraft ammunition and weapons plummeted. Railways and shipping networks collapsed. The once vaunted Japanese military machine, already crippled by fuel shortages and naval defeats, now lost the support of its civilian infrastructure. LeMay's raids achieved in months what years of blockade and conventional bombing had failed to accomplish. By July, Tokyo itself was a hollow shell, its government ministries operating out of temporary shelters, its citizens surviving in makeshift huts or refugee camps. But the human cost was incalculable. Survivors carried memories of that night for the rest of their lives. They spoke of firestorms so fierce that clothing burst into flame while people still wore it. They remembered the screams of children, the choking black smoke, the rivers clogged with bodies. The Japanese government censored reports to prevent panic, but the truth could not be hidden. Everyone knew someone who had died. Everyone had seen the ashes. In the United States, reactions were mixed. Military leaders hailed the raids as a turning point, proof that American industry and ingenuity could overcome even the most formidable obstacles. Newspapers published dramatic photographs of Tokyo in ruins, describing the B-29 seconds as unstoppable engines of justice. Yet some voices expressed unease. Clergymen, journalists, and even some politicians questioned whether burning civilians alive could be justified. LeMay himself was blunt. "If we lose, we'll be tried as war criminals," he said, "but we won't lose." To him, the calculation was simple. Every night of bombing shortened the war, and every day saved meant fewer American soldiers killed in an invasion. The Japanese, for their part, saw the writing on the wall. By the summer of 1945, their cities were disappearing one by one. The government clung stubbornly to the hope of negotiating favorable surrender terms, but morale was collapsing. Civilians whispered that the emperor himself could not protect them. Pilots who had once mocked the B-29 as too big to fly now dreaded its sound overhead. It was no longer a joke. It was a symbol of inevitability. The raids also paved the way for the final act of the war. By August 1945, Japan was already on its knees, its cities gutted and its economy in ruins. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they struck a nation already crippled by months of fire and steel. Many historians argue that the firebombings more than the atomic strikes convinced Japan's leaders that surrender was unavoidable. The B-29 had demonstrated that America could erase any city any night it chose. Resistance was hopeless. In the years that followed, the legacy of the Tokyo firebombing sparked fierce debate. Was it necessary? Was it moral? Some argued it was the only way to avoid a bloody invasion that might have cost 1 million lives. Others insisted it was a war crime, an act of terror against civilians. For the survivors, the debate was meaningless. They remembered only the fire, the heat, and the silence of a city turned to ash. Yet one fact was undeniable: the B-29 superfortress, once ridiculed as too heavy, too clumsy, and too ambitious, had reshaped the course of history. It embodied America's unmatched industrial might, its capacity to adapt strategy when faced with failure, and its willingness to use overwhelming force to end the war. The aircraft that Japanese pilots once laughed at became the very instrument that silenced their laughter forever. The night Tokyo burned was more than a battle. It was a warning to the world of what modern war had become. A single fleet of bombers could erase a capital in hours. Cities were no longer fortresses. Distance and pride were no longer shields. Technology and industry had changed the rules forever. From that moment on, warfare would never be the same.